Hi everyone, I'm meteorologist Alexa Minton at WKYT Channel 27. I've been asked to introduce this video containing stories from the 1974 tornado outbreak here in Madison County. 1974 was the year they saw one of the deadliest tornado outbreaks in U.S. history. The technology used to predict tornadoes back then was very limited and relied heavily on human observation in a National Weather Service program called Skywarn, which is still in effect today. Meteorologists and trained volunteers throughout the state would look for signs like dark green skies, low-hanging clouds, and strong winds to predict the formation of a tornado. However, these signs were not always accurate and often led to false alarms or missed warnings. Dubbed the super outbreak, at least 148 tornadoes struck 13 states from the Gulf Coast to the Great Lakes over a 16-hour period, from the afternoon of April 3, 1974, to the early morning hours of April 4, 1974. When it was over, 330 people were dead, and 5,484 were injured. Damage from all the tornadoes combined added up to a path of more than 2,500 miles, about the width of the United States. 7 of those dead were in Madison County. The F4 tornado touched down in Garrett County and tore across northwest Madison County and finally lifted in Clark County. Despite remaining in rural areas, it still took 7 lives and injured 28 people. 30 homes and Whitehall Elementary School were destroyed. We're going to watch and listen to those Madison Countyans tell their stories of that eventful, life-changing evening. Fast forward to the present day, and we've come a long way in predicting tornadoes. With advanced technology like Doppler radar, satellite imagery, and computer models, meteorologists like me can now detect and track tornadoes with more precision. Doppler radar is especially helpful in detecting rotation within a storm, which is a key indicator of tornado formation. The accuracy of tornado predictions has also greatly improved over the years. Back in 1974, the average lead time for a tornado warning was only 5 minutes. This meant that people had very little time to take cover and prepare for the storm. However, with the advanced technology we have today, the average lead time for a tornado warning has increased to 13 minutes. This may not seem like a big difference, but those extra minutes can mean the difference between life and death. Other future technologies that are being developed include things like drones to gather data from inside of a storm and artificial intelligence algorithms that can analyze large amounts of data to predict the likelihood of a tornado forming. The differences between tornado predicting technology in 1974 compared to the year 2024 are quite significant. From relying on human observation to using advanced technology, like Doppler radar, we have come a long way in predicting tornadoes. And with the continuous development of new technologies, we can only expect the accuracy of tornado predictions to improve even further in the future. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight and thank those that decided how important it is to tell their stories of that night while honoring those who lost their lives during this tragic event.
I had fenced all day. About 4 o'clock, we had a storm. Blew a barn door off into some 2 or 3 gates over. And it kind of let up, and I had caught my horse and saddled her up. I was going to try to get the cattle back up, but it had gotten out. And it come another storm. And I sat in the barn for about 20 or 30 minutes, and I finally said, well, no use trying. I just turned the horse loose and went on to the house. It was my birthday. She had fixed the dinner. I come in and got in the shower, took a shower just had gotten out, and Brother John called. I just got out. I talked to the phone. He said they got tornado warning. Well, that's all right. They had that little storm this afternoon, but it's nothing bad now. Well, at that time, I was a shop teacher at George Rogers Clark High School, and myself and the woodworking teacher had the open shop on Wednesday evening, and we had about 15 or 20 boys in the shop working. And it about 6 o'clock in Winchester, it did hail. It came a storm. And I had a radio playing, and I never paid any attention to the storm warning, but I had a radio playing in the shop, and it said tornado warning for northern Madison County. And I said, well, that's me. And I go down, we didn't have cell phones, and I go down to the lobby and put my quarter in the phone, and I call Evan. Well, I first called my house. No answer. It just rang, rang, rang. And then I called Evan. And I said, tornado warning. He said, he kind of made fun of me. He said, it looked like it might rain. I said, well, I heard a tornado warning and we talked a minute and then I hung up. About that time, her daddy said, we lived in a trailer at that time. He said, we better get out of here.
He was walking forward.
And surprisingly, nobody questioned him. I ran to the bedroom, pulled a pair of boots on, and out the door we went. And when we went out the door, I did not see no funnel cloud. But it was the blackest cloud right on the ground. You could just see stuff rolling out of it. Well, I taught a small engine class at Clark County. It had about 15 or 20 little Briggs and Stratton motors. You know what I'm talking about? We took all them and poured about a pint of gas out of every one of them and got enough gas, and we had to go to 64 to Lexington and then come back 75. We got to Clay's Ferry and we was right in the middle of the Clay's Ferry Bridge about, I don't know, it was probably midnight, I guess. And that one hit down there. About blew us off the bridge. And then never dawned on me of a tornado though. And further we came down 75 would be semis turned up, and I got almost where I could see the farm and I saw a light. I said, well, my wife's brother works at Gibson Greeting Card and they got a bunch of candles and she got every candle in the house burning. I don't know what the light was. And then I got up there by Whitehall School. They had the road blocked. State police wouldn't said you can't go. I said, well, I live over there. I said, I'm going to go. He said, you better go. And I pulled in, and I had left my truck right there about where the road comes out at the Cracker Barrel. And there was a group of people around my truck, and she was one of them. And about that time, here come a pickup truck in, and Evan jumped out. He had on a white T-shirt, no hat, nothing, and a pair of pants. He run up there, his eyes was about that big. We got in a car and a truck. It just barely got in them. I jerked the door out of my hand getting in the car and wrapped it back around the fender. I finally got it pulled back, was holding it. Covered the windshield with mud. One little point about like that you could see out the corner. Sitting under a big pine tree, and I said, I've got to get out from under this tree. I started the car up, started to back up. You could just feel the car do this. Then all of a sudden, just like you pushed us right into the ground. He said, John, there ain't nothing left. I said, my house? I just built it. He said, you ain't got no house. It's gone.
Mother was watching TV because they lived right behind us in the mobile home. And tornadoes were just touching down everywhere. I think Brandenburg had just been hit. And we had to go get my sister at work because she didn't have a car. And we got in the car, and when we got up between the churches, just everybody was running everywhere, cars going everywhere. And we pulled up at Brett's, and the sky was blood red, and right below it was just black, coal black, laying right down on the horizon. And she jumped in the car, and we ran back, and by the time we got back up to the churches, there's nobody out. Everybody was gone. So we raced home and parked in front of the garage and ran inside, and I gave the 2-year-old to my mother and told her to go back in the basement. And my sister and I ran upstairs, and we looked out the picture window, and it was on the ground, like Evan said. It was just rolling. There was no funnel. It was just on the ground rolling. And we ran back downstairs and tried to get under a bed, and that didn't work. So John had his Jeep in the corner, and we got behind the Jeep, southwest corner. And when it hit, it did hail just a little bit. Nothing like we had the other night. Just a little bit of hail. And it roared. It sounded like nails being pulled out of wood to me. And the garage door was fiberglass. It started to shake, and then it popped, and it was gone. And we just sat behind that Jeep, and when it was over, we got up and walked out. There was just like a path. Everything, debris all around us. And we walked out, and none of us was hurt. The Jeep, all 4 tires were flattened from the debris that had fallen on it.
The floor comes down.
Uh-huh. And when they raised the floor, the 4 tires came back up. But it saved our lives.
My parents and my uncle and aunt, my parents Neil and Dorothy Whitaker, and my aunt and uncle Nelson and Greta Whitaker were proprietors of C.W. Whitaker and Sons General Store in Poozy Ridge. And the day was rather calm, best I remember. And on that Wednesday night, I was, as a campus minister at Eastern Kentucky University, I was meeting with a group of students on the 3rd floor of the Combs building, and we saw that there was a storm coming. The lights went out, and we had about 50 or 60 college students there in the building, and we were quoting scripture and singing songs. The lights were out. It was dark. The campus police came and escorted us out of the building, telling us there had been a terrible storm. I got home pretty quickly. The phone rang. It was my Aunt Greta, and all she could say as she was crying was, "It's all gone. It's all gone." To quote my father, Neil Whitaker, it was a rough night in Poozy Ridge. And to this day, I'm rather emotional about it. I offer no apology for that, and I'm sure everybody understands because of the impact this storm had on our county. And my Aunt Greta was in the store about 6:30. There were a lot of farmers in the store after their day's work, and my family, being a church-going family, closed the store and started down to Salem Christian Church in Poozy Ridge in my grandfather's new car. The hail was so bad, he said he wished he had left it at home because it was absolutely going to beat the hood off the car.
We had an apple tree where it was set. We had an apple tree set here, and my dad's truck in the car set here, through here, didn't even. And besides that apple tree, we saw the apple tree go, and the camper go over the hill. I said, "Daddy, there goes your camper." I could see it rolling.
Right.
We were tossing and turning, and my mother, made the comment, I'd never heard my mother pray like she prayed that night. And she said, "Let me tell you something, it was time to pray."
Up at John's house, of course, Christy's room back there, she had a little aluminum doll table. And right out from her room, John's back porch, was a cistern. Had a 2-foot square, 4-inch thick piece of concrete covering the entrance into the kitchen, into the cistern.
Sister.
It was 200 to 300 yards down in the field. A little aluminum doll table and one chair still sitting on the floor in Christy's room.
There were some real strange things that happened. In our house, there was a large picture, for example, on a living room wall, and it was hanging 2 rooms away on a nail, almost perfectly aligned in another room. My father had a watch in the drawer of a slant-top desk, and the desk was in another room, and the watch was hanging away in the other end of the house on a doorknob of a bedroom. There was a beautiful clock that was on my father's and mother's mantle, and that whole end of the house was taken away. And Johnny Collins, a undertaker there now and funeral director in Richmond, was in the community, and he went to the site before I got there and was moving brick away for some reason at that particular location of that chimney. And about 2 feet down, he saw that clock laying face up. It's a full glass, fashion glass calendar clock. And we put it in the trunk of his car. I have it to this day in my home as a treasure, not only from the family, but also from that storm. We took it to the clockmaker. It did not even need cleaning. The glass was not scratched or broken.
I just saw a line of smoke is what I thought I was watching. And as I was talking, it kept moving. And I watched it for a couple seconds, I guess, and it kept moving. And it was moving that way.
She saw it. She was fixing to leave my buddy's house, and she saw it coming toward the school from right there by the golf course. It was going through power lines, and so she jumps in the car and comes driving to the school real fast. And she comes in the door, and we're running up down the floor playing ball.
No, my husband's out there, I need to get out there and warn him. And as I drove that way, I watched it out of the corner of my eye, and I was feeling like I'm trying to outrun it. And when I turned in to the parking lot, it almost looked like it was going to bypass the school.
We go around, we had to run all the way around the back of the gym to see it, and it was coming across that road. I'm telling you, it looked just like that Tiger Paw commercial they used to do for tires. It looked awful.
We got in the boiler room was right in the little area that we got into, and everybody got down, and everybody held everybody else down the best they could, and that the pipes in that boiler room burst, and that hot water come out of there, and I remember, he was on top of me, and I was looking up out under his arm, and I thought, well, what am I looking at? The lights have come back on. Of course, what I was looking at was the sky.
You could just feel it trying to pull you out. And we were probably close to the door in some of them. Don't remember for sure, but not intentionally or nothing. Just everybody just grabbed a spot and hit it because there wasn't time to do much. But my back, I never will forget. When I borrowed that shirt to put it on, there was so much sand and mortar chips and grit that I had to wash my back before I could put that shirt on. It just all over you. She was so scared she'd make a fool out of herself. And we're going around that corner, and then out of the blue, she said, "I think this tornado's going to hit this school." I'm like, "What?" Wow. And I know we started running back, and she started to go around a puddle of water there. I just grabbed her and drug her right to it, But right before it hit, it hailed and rained real hard, and then just quit. Completely quit. And anytime something like that happens, we start definitely looking for cover, even if there's not a warning.
We decided to go to my mother and daddy's house because they had a basement. It was an old World War II home, which was built during World War II, and it was, but it had a basement. Our trailer lived about 300 feet up the road, up the farm road, and we decided to go down there. And so we get ready, and Sonny and Cher came on TV, and then it did come a quick hailstorm, and we looked out the front porch, and so it was just getting dark. So I looked back toward Richmond, and it looked black, and I could see it was narrow. It was wide but narrow in the sky, and as it got closer and closer, I could see that it was a tornado. It looked like a tornado, and it didn't have a funnel. It was just a big wide cloud. So I told my mother and daddy and Mimi to go to the basement, and I'd come. So I go to the front porch. They had a screened-in jalousie window front porch on the house, and you could see a long way. And I could see this tornado coming. And I think probably when it about hit Whitehall School, you get all those flashes. And I saw that, and I watched it, and of course they were saying, come on, let's go, come on to the basement. And I said, well, I'm thinking to myself, it's not going to hit till it gets there. And then as it got closer and closer, and about the time it was about a half a mile or a mile from us, and you could see boards fly out, and it would suck them in.
The kitchen floor fell just about that far from my shoulder into the basement where we were. But we were in the southwest corner.
Where we were supposed to be.
Mr. Turpin got a little scratch about that long
Back
on the top of his head, and that was it.
So we sat there a while, and we were afraid to get out because the light lines, we could see the light lines laying on the ground. And somebody came to the front gate, and we had two big concrete block posts at the front gate, and one of them had fallen in the road. So whoever it was, they turned and left, because I'm sure we hollered at them, but they couldn't hear us. And then it was starting to rain, so we got one of the mattresses out of the basement that had come from upstairs and set it over that corner. And we all got under that corner and sat there, and I don't know, 15, 20 minutes, maybe half an hour. Time doesn't mean much
it
that time.
It wasn't real long, but it was
It looked like, as I look around now, I wasn't in the war per se, and it looked like a war zone, but because the trees were all mangled, and as it would flash, you could see that war scene. And it was a war. It was a war of wind.
We come across another driver. He drove for roadway, and he said, yeah, I heard there was 4 people down at Red House that got killed. And that's where we lived, and that's where 4 of our family members were still at. So that kind of put a little more pressure on. We got to get home and find out what's going on. The cattle had mostly sensed it, I reckon, and they'd went back north on the farm, and most of them survived without any problem. I had one calf that was special. I had him up in the barn there taking care of him because he was the largest calf I'd ever had. He was 125 pounds at birth, and he was a monster Charolais calf, beautiful. And I had him up taking care of him and got him killed. He just crushed his bones. You couldn't even tell he had bones. It was like a rag when you picked him up. He was just crushed. I was just out of high school starting, and that was my first farm, and it kind of made it really hard because I was a young man starting out, and you're borrowing money to operate your farm, and then you have a whole lot of expense that was unplanned, that you had to try to deal with. And it took me several years to get back to where I could kind of break even, and I ended up letting that farm go, and Evan and John McCord took it over.
I had just I had taken a break from college at Eastern and was working for my best friend's father at his I can't think of the name of it was a heat treating factory, And I worked in the office with two other ladies, two women, and it was just a regular day, but I just remember it being exceptionally hot. Got home probably at 5:30. It was just my dad and me together at our home, and it was just incredibly hot. I fixed him some dinner, and then I guess I wasn't eating myself at that time and went down the hall to my bedroom. And within 2 minutes, it was right around 7 o'clock at that time, Daddy came to the door and said, with great feeling, "Get in the car." And he was a mild-mannered man and never really raised his voice and didn't seem to have, he had an urgency to him that I don't think I had seen. He honked the horn, at which point I grabbed a pair of shoes and ran out to the car. When I opened the door, I just saw this overwhelmingly black, oppressive sky. And ran and got in the car. He is flying down the driveway, which was not like him either. And I remember saying, "What's going on?" And he said, "A storm is coming." At that moment, a telephone pole just broke in two as if you'd broken a pencil. And that's when I knew, oh my gosh, this is a tornado. This is what's happening, because I had never seen anything like it before. Everything stopped. He couldn't drive it. He couldn't brake it. There was no acceleration. He couldn't steer it. And suddenly we were engulfed in this moist, dark cloud, filled with debris. Things were hitting the windows, and I remember thinking, because the storm was hitting the driver's side first, I remember thinking, Grant held his head, because if anything hits him, it could cause a brain injury, and I knew it was bad. And so I scooted over and I grabbed him and I put my hands around his head. And suddenly I thought, well, if we make it through, that's the goal. I said, we're going to die. We're going to die. And he was holding on to me. I was holding on to his head, and he said, "Hang on, hun. Hang on, hun." That's all he said. We were being pushed to the right off the road. When I thought, well, we're going to tumble. We're going to tumble down, and this is going to be it. And then this big boom happened, and it jolted the car to the right even further, and it was over. That was it. I didn't cry. I was just in such shock at what had just happened. And electric lines were down. We had 3 horses, I think, at that time, and they were running and jumping the electric lines. We stood there for a minute and started to walk toward Richmond, but we couldn't get very far because there was debris in the electric lines. And he was so concerned that in my shock that I might hurt myself, that's how I interpreted it, that he made me literally crawl under the lines that were crossing the road. He did not want me to try to step over them.
We were putting up a fence around a ridge that day, and as I recall, it was a very windy day, unusually windy. It was very warm, as I remember, for the time of year. Our uncle, who lived at Paint Lick, called and said he had heard on the television that there was a tornado that had been in Casey County, I think, as I recall, and that they had named Cottonburg could be in the path of that. And of course, that's that Poozy Ridge area. We had this old black dog that was a Labrador, and
never came in the house. He's just a farm dog. And he says, old Blackie is acting very nervous. He happened to notice that. And he said, so he went to look out at the cloud, and old Blackie tried to get in the house. Never tried to get in the house. So I think the dog sensed there was danger. We just sort of kept watching the cloud. And as we watched, it just kept getting worse and worse. We had somewhat of a storm at the house with some hail. And then it cleared off, and at our house was very clear. And then we saw off in the distance this cloud, and unusual looking, sort of had light under it, and then there was to my remembrance, a kind of a square hanging down. And I remember my daddy saying that cloud is doing some damage somewhere. A neighbor came to our house and said he had heard that the Whitaker's store had blown away, and there had been a tornado come through up the road about 2 miles from our house. So naturally we went up to see what was going on, and I do remember as we rounded the curve, it was just shocking at what we saw, the devastation. And we said, my goodness, the store is gone, and there's the Long's house is gone. Mr. Whitaker's house is gone. Other houses were torn all to pieces, and debris was everywhere. And so it was just a very shocking time. This state policeman wanted to know where the Long's house was. And so my brother and I took him around a little road. They were around a little road off of the main road to show him where their house was. And of course he had a good flashlight type with him. And I can remember him shining the light where their house was, and he says, this looks like it's been vacuumed. The Whitakers attended Salem Christian Church, and we did also. And they had changed the prayer meeting time and moved the time from I can't remember the times exactly, but moved it up an hour later. But the Whitakers forgot that. And so they closed the store and went at the normal time, and the tornado came through and took the store away while they were at church. And of course, they were down there wondering why nobody else had come to church, and the tornado went through while they were there. So his son Franklin told me, he said if they had not got mixed up in the time, they'd all been sitting right there in the store.
My class had won a 4-H group act variety show, and our prize was about $25. And with a little coaching from our teacher, Mrs. Sally McMullen, we decided as a class to spend it on buying a barometer for our classroom to help with our science learning. I believe I'm going to have Mr. Neal take it down in the morning and send it back and ask for a replacement that actually works, because it's just not really supposed to work that way. Little did we know it was working perfectly, because before a storm like that, the barometric pressure does indeed drop quite a bit. My parents and I lived in Boone Village out on Highway 627 past the truck stop, and my mother knew there was some kind of storm issue, but my dad did not. And he was busy picking up ads for the Richmond Register. Matter of fact, I was supposed to have been picked up at 4 o'clock from Whitehall. Poor Mr. Merwin Jackson, the principal, had to hang around till Dad finally got there at 5 o'clock. So I was the last daytime student to leave. And it was absolutely pouring the rain. And then there was kind of this greenish look about the place that I didn't ever recall seeing before. So Dad took me home, Mom was home, and it rained a lot, it hailed, then it would kind of clear off, then it stormed some more, and at one point Dad was going to go out and get a couple of the hailstones from the front yard, and it took all three of us to push the front door closed when he came back in with these rather sizable hailstones. The gas station across the street from Whitehall Elementary was a Shell gas station. And that was before all of Bluegrass Junction was a development. It was 2 houses and a gas station across the street. And so when the tornado came through, it knocked only one letter off of the sign, and it was the S. And so the photographer at the Richmond Daily Register took a picture of the remaining sign, and it became the picture on the front page the next day of the newspaper. That did not sit well with a lot of especially elderly ladies in the community that thought that was highly inappropriate. And because my dad was affiliated with the newspaper, even though his job was advertising director, he got lots of phone calls for weeks about how inappropriate that was. And, you know, looking at it now, that was highly descriptive of what the place looked like.
And then we stayed there all night, and of course we hated to go back in the morning because we knew what it was going to look like. We didn't have a car.
All we had was
I didn't have my billfold.
all we had what was on our back.
She didn't have her purse.
Nothing.
I had a pair of moccasin shoes on. Of course, first thing I did, I stuck a nail in my foot. And we go to the hospital. He said, "We got to show us your insurance card."
No,
Ma'am, I don't have an insurance card. I don't have a billfold.
we can't touch you.
And so she worked at Madison Bank there, so she had them call Kate Burnham. He said, "You people see them people. They need you."
And we were fine.
We were fine. And I took my tetanus shot, in other words. And I borrowed a pair of shoes from my father-in-law, about a half size too small. Of course, they felt real good too. Her brother came to see about us. He didn't know where we were live. He'd heard that 2 people on Peacock had been killed. They didn't know whether it was us or not. And it was our neighbors across the road, the Laneharts. And then there were 2 people down over the hill at Red House that were killed. But he didn't know whether it was us or not.
Well, I remember it was a very hot day. It was really hot. And I lived in Lexington, and I'd worked that day. I went home, and it come up a real, I lived in the upstairs over my sister and my brother-in-law. It was really hot that day, and we went home, and I took a bath. And somebody called about 8 o'clock, and called my brother-in-law, and it scared him so bad he just hung the phone up. And, back then you didn't have no answering machine or nothing, so we didn't know who called. So it said that there'd been a tornado and my mom and dad got killed. So my wife, she was 6 months pregnant, so I told her, I said, I'm going over there. It was still thunder and lightning going on. So I had an old Dodge truck. So I started out. I made it over on the other side of the river in Fayette County. Come a real wind, almost blew me off the road, so I stopped between the cliffs there. And it sort of died down, and I come on when I cut to 627 over there. Truck stop, I was a bunch of state police sitting there, so I just pulled in there, and I said, I asked him, I said, "There been a tornado over here?" He said, "They've been everywhere." So I said, "Was it one on Brookstown? That's where my mom and dad lived." And he said, "I don't know, they've been everywhere." So he said the interstate was closed. So up at Richmond exit, because it come through there. So I went down, crossed Three Forks, not Three Forks. I don't even know the name of it. A little road down there that comes out at Red House. So I crossed it, going down through there, and I met a car coming up through there, and he said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to Peacock, where my mom and dad live." And he says, "You can't get through there." I said, "It's a creek's over the road." I said, "I gotta go." So I went on, I made it, and I started up the hill at Red House, and it was just calm as it could be. And I said, "There'd be no tornado here." So I went on up, and you had to go around the curve. When I went around the curve, I seen all these flashing lights and all that, and I said, "Oh no." So I looked up at the hill where the house was, and it was gone. And so I pulled down there and I asked them. They said, we took 3 or 4 people out of here. We don't know. So I said, well, I'll go to the hospital. So I went to Patty Clay and went in the emergency room, and there was two cops standing there. So they opened the door up back in the hall, and I seen some people laying back there in the hallway. So I started back through there, and he said, no, you can't go there. So I told him, I said, look, my mom and dad, I think they're up here. And he said, well, you just stay there, I'll find out. So he come back and he told me, he said, yeah, that's them and they're dead. I said, can I see them? He said, no, you don't want to see them.
I had started that because back when I was 4 years old, living in Florida, we had been hit by a very severe tornado. Our house got hit. It was depending on whose research you read, it was F3 or F4. Just evaluating the damage, looking at the photos my mother took. The other houses in the neighborhood had F3 level damage. Ours was F2. But either way, it was unlivable after the strike. But anyway, I survived. Nobody in my family was seriously hurt. But that tornado killed 17 people. And it was March 31st, 1962, Milton, Florida. And it terrorized me, as you might guess. That's an awful thing to put a little child through. Well, my father had been a Navy pilot for many years and flown transatlantic missions and all, so he was pretty good at these things. So we got the Kentucky map out, and he did most of the work. I sat there and looked on anxiously, and he said, well, he concluded, based on what the report said, and this was at 6:30, if it was accurate, then it should pass north of us at approximately 7 o'clock and be approximately 3 miles to the north of us. I started scanning, but I was going to do my job. I was scared. Everything I'd heard about, I was quite sure this thing was going to stay on the ground a long way, and I was sure it was going to be bad. I didn't know it was bad. It was, but I didn't know that. But just my gut told me this is going to be awful bad, and it's going to stay on the ground all the way here. There were people depending on me to do this. Now, I couldn't do anything for the folks in Richmond and to the west. I mean, by the time it got to where I could see it, it would be beyond them. But I would be working to provide warnings for the folks to the east and the northeast. Eastern Madison County, Clark County, and so on. So that's basically who I work to protect. And Dad said it'd come into view at 7 o'clock if the data was right. And it did, right at 7. I looked at my watch, looked up there to the northwest, and there it was, 7 o'clock, right where Dad said it would be. Great big family. I couldn't see the whole thing from top to bottom. The lower end of it was blocked by tree lines. I called, called the operator first, like I was supposed to, and I told her what I wanted to do. She said, I can't. She said, all the telephone lines, long distance lines are down. I can't send the call through. And I said, are you sure? And she said, yes. Well, all right. That was that. But then the last picture he took, he went over to the north end of the building. He'd been on the west now, and he went over to the north end of the building. And he took that picture looking out across, basically across Richmond, and the sun is setting, and it's just this magnificent silhouetted picture. That's the one everyone sees. And what happened, the way I got my name on it was 15 years ago or so, there was a website, I don't even know if it's up and running anymore, that printed up things of storms, pictures and whatnot, and I told them that, I had some images of that tornado here, and that the last one was really, really great. And that I did not I told them very straightforward, I did not take the pictures. I told them very bluntly in writing, I didn't take the pictures. But I just simply, I would appreciate though if they would give me credit for having contributed it, which I figured it would be in the information about it. But they put it on the print. And so everybody thinks I took the picture, but I didn't. I finally confronted my demon after all those years. And while I'm still very much respect him, I don't live in terror of him anymore. So there was one positive angle for me.
And I just knew, being a newspaper guy, that the next day was going to be a busy day. Not knowing exactly what happened, I knew that there was damage out around the Whitehall area because I could see it. But the other things that happened in Cottonburg and down around Red House, had no idea. So I just knew that something terrible had happened, and I was going to have a full day of reporting and taking pictures. You know, we didn't have any power, but I was going to be ready in case, you know, I was sent out to cover something. And I was there at the office, and all of a sudden, here comes Sheriff Harold Kirby, pulls into the spot, and he gets out real quick, and he says, "You want to go cover and see the damage?" And I said, "Yeah, that'd be great." I was the only news person at the time that was allowed to go into the damaged area, especially the Whitehall school area, because I was with a police officer, and nobody else had clearance. So I was lucky in that respect. I was able to see that up close, firsthand, first thing in the morning. It was just devastating. You know, Whitehall, the service station across the roads, a couple of the homes were pretty much shattered. The roof was off most of the Whitehall school. The gymnasium roof had collapsed. Papers, books, and everything were just scattered everywhere. I got some pictures there, and then Sheriff Kirby said, "Let's go see the route." So we went from there out to Cottonburg. And you know, I remember when I was 5 years old, there had been a tornado out there at Cottonburg, Page Hill, down Barnes Mill Road. So this path was almost identical. And I saw the Whitaker store where it had been, blown away. Saw the home where the Long family had been killed. And then from there, we just followed the path. We went on down to the Barnes Mill Road area, traveled around, went down to Tate's Creek Road. There's where I saw some really strange things. I mean, in tornadoes, you just never know what the devastation is going to be, but, you saw cattle in trees. You saw a fence post driven through a cow like a stake. You saw cars flipped up, wedged into trees, upside down. Homes, just blown away. And then from there, we went out to the Red House Road area, Peacock Road, and that's where there were two more couples that were killed out that way. I think their names were the Laneharts and the Pearsons. And they lived in mobile homes. And the mobile homes were just shattered. You can imagine, it's like they have a bomb go off inside and just everything is exploded. And out in that area, another strange thing that I saw was there was a home that was located not too far from where those couples lived. It was a nice big old farmhouse, and 2 stories, if I remember right. They used to be 2 stories. And we drove up, and I got out of the car and walked up, and the only thing that was there was a foundation. The entire house was gone. There was nothing there except the concrete foundation. And I got up and looked down in the foundation, and another strange factor, the lady that lived there had done a lot of canning. She had all of her vegetables and everything on shelves. Those things had not been touched, and the house was gone. And you could see where it was scattered across the hillside. But that was just another thing that I'll always remember, how that house could have been just lifted up and taken away, but all the stuff in the basement was not touched. The school was totally blown away. They couldn't, it was like it was April, so they still had over a month and a half left of school. So they had to come up with some way to get those kids in class. I can't remember which church it is, but they used churches and other schools that had empty classrooms, so they had kids scattered around to finish up the school year. So that was the biggest challenge, I think. I heard a story about Eddie Pullins, who back then worked for the Madison County Schools Central Office, and he went out to Whitehall that morning, same morning I went out there with the sheriff, and he went through the building, was trying to collect teachers' records and attendance books and so forth, grade books. And I think he found everything, surprisingly, with all the damage and stuff, and all that stuff was still there. I think some of it got wet, of course, but nothing disappeared. So that was pretty much, I thought, a minor miracle.
The storm in 55 or 56 went out the ridge of Barnes Mill Road and took out several houses. There was a baby born that night in 55 or 56, and they named the baby Tornado Long.
The family who died, who lived on our farm, and was Dan Long and his wife and daughter. And his daughter was maybe 14 or 15, and I think her name was Barbara. And they had other children. One of their children's, I don't know his real name, I knew it at one point in time, but his nickname was Tornado because the Long family had lived in our tenant house or had been with another aunt or uncles on their farm. I hope I'm remembering this correctly. But the Long family had been around since I could remember. So they were always a part of our farm, our family's tenant family who worked the farm alongside Daddy and his brothers. And so the story was, the way I remember it was that 20 years earlier, when Dan and his wife had this boy, this child, gave birth to him, the night he was born, a tornado had cut through the edge of our farm. It didn't cause any damage to property or people, but, it had cut through the farm. And they nicknamed this young man Tornado. And I can remember growing up and, hearing Daddy say about, I think tornadoes coming to help with something. So that's the story. When the tornado happened that took the Longs' lives, Daddy had said, knowing that their house was wiped off the face of the earth, I hope they had gone to the hospital to see Tornado's baby.
The radio was real crackly, and it's talking about a tornado, probably a Louisville station. And I'm going right into Spaghetti Junction there at Frankfort. And the sky was really black, and I said, well, that's a tornado. But I said, that looks like a tornado, but that's not one. Well, the reason that it wasn't, to me, a tornado, it was on the ground, and I was driving into it. I get right to the intersection there, what they used to call Spaghetti Junction, right there at Jet, and I turned right to go down into town. I had a friend that lived down on 2nd Street, right past Rebecca Ruth, and as I'm going down the hill, right past Frankfort Cemetery, the wind was so bad that it just stopped the Volkswagen going downhill. It stopped it.
As we got closer to the truck stop exit, still didn't realize that it was any kind of unusually intense storm, just real dark. But by the time we got almost to the exit, the hail started coming down in big chunks, and I'll never forget the sound of that hail hitting that car. It was just, we were just almost got afraid that it was going to break the windshield out. And I remember my mom and dad and you all saying, well, do you think we need to pull off to the side and get around that next one of these road cuts here and get some shielding from the wind? But we decided to keep on going until we got to that truck stop out there where Love's is now. It was a different name at the time, but we made it to that truck stop and rode the storm out. If we'd have been about 5 minutes later, we would have been right in the path of that tornado when it came across the interstate. And we've all talked about that, what a close call that we were. But again, the significance of how dark it was, particularly out looking towards the western part of Madison County, how dark the clouds were. And then in behind was an orange glow. I guess it was the sun going down in behind the storm. And I'll never forget the sight, particularly of where the tornado had hit people's homes, and people were out picking up their clothing and stuff out of these fields. And that was a sad sight. Also remember how devastating it was to the trees. Just seeing just big swaths of trees mowed down flat. It was like a lawnmower had gone through and flattened everything down. Particularly, I guess kind of a vivid memory is like on the corner of Tates Creek Road and Crutcher Pike, back up through there. Just the big swath of trees down all through there.
Things
Don't mean
much. They don't mean as much as family and friends.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I got to say about it.
Yeah.
You know, there's things on this earth that we think we can't do without.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've just got to have it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me tell you something. You let a tornado hit you and wake up the next morning and think about it.
You can believe about anything anybody tells you about a tornado. You can definitely, somewhere along the line, you could see something of that caliber happening.
The irony of the thing, it's for a number of years. Every time it give a storm, I want to know where everybody was, so I could know where everybody was. And it was real bothersome when they gave a watch. And I remember the next year, on the 3rd of
Same day.
It was the same day. It had a stormy night. Of course, it never developed. And the one thing that you live with is it's that point in time. It's before the tornado and after the tornado.
You know, the community country stores in Poozy Ridge were real treasures, as they were throughout the county. A place where you could buy and sell and trade and gathering news of the day, friendships, and they were very family oriented. Everyone was welcome. And Whitaker store was the largest of the stores in Poozy Ridge, and it was one of those treasures. And it was gone in a matter of seconds. The community came together to see what they could do and what they could help salvage. There were two houses, as I say. There was the house that I grew up in. Next door to the store was my grandfather's house, where he and his wife Mabel raised their 5 children, and then the store itself and all the other buildings. I arrived on the scene about 2 to 3 hours after I got the phone call, as I was following a road crew from Richmond, and they were cutting trees out of the road so we could pass through. And when we got there, it was just devastating. There must have been 30 or 40 people there assisting and helping. And our house was partially damaged, but my grandfather's house was completely gone and barely found any silverware left in the house. And the store was, of course, gone, and all of those outbuildings. It was just horrendous. It's hard to describe. The way I describe it to people is, when you see it on TV, it's just like that, except it's your stuff.
You asked me earlier about outpouring of community support. People made up money. There was money donated. There was, I know there was donations to help those families that lost loved ones and for some medical care and things. And churches that were very liberal. And so the outpouring of community support was really noticed at that time period, and also in 2009 when we were affected the same way. The next morning, our yard was full of people to help us, and so a large outpouring of community support.
My grandfather was walking through the yard. He was about 78 or 9 at the time, and I was following him and our minister, Morris Mounts. And Mr. Mounts said to him, "Mr. Whitaker, you have suffered a great loss here today." And my grandfather simply said to him, "Now, Morris, let me ask you a question. I understand that God has never made a mistake. Is that right?" And Morris said, "Yes, that's right, Creighton." And he said, "Well, mark my word, he did not make one this time either. Something good will come from this." I could not stand to hear any more of the conversation, and I walked away. Years later, my grandfather died, of course, and the family moved on. I got word, I'm living in Tennessee, and I was at that time. I got word that one of Creighton's sons, my Uncle Franklin, had decided later in life to accept Christ and be baptized, and he was. A few weeks later, I was back in Richmond. I saw him in church, and I asked him, "What influenced you most to make your decision for Christ?" And he simply said this: "The faith that my father had during the tornado." And I said, there it is. There's that something good that would come from that storm.
We walked down to the Long's house, the tenant house, which was a newer house on the farm, and it had block foundation, I think, and it was as if it had been swept clean. There was really nothing there. There was a small pond next to the driveway outside the fence of where their house stood, and a small tree that withstood the storm. The smaller trees did. And there were pieces of their life hanging in that tree: dish towels, shirts, anything that could hang on to a branch. It was almost like it was a monument to them in the saddest way.